This again. There you go.
Hello, and welcome to the Why Post-Liberalism Failed podcast. My name is James Patterson. I'm Associate Professor of Politics at Ave Maria University. With me is my co-author and co-host, Dr. Thomas Howes. Say hello to everyone, Thomas.
Hi, everybody.
We are writing a book for Acton University on post-liberalism, one that we're very excited about and currently focused especially on, given that it is the summer. It is a summer writing season for professors. I should also mention that today is June 19th, Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth, Thomas.
Oh, thank you.
2024. And so this is our first episode, and we are going to be doing some kind of introducing of ourselves and some laying of the foundation for what we hope might be a nice accompaniment for the book when it comes out, as well as maybe a little bit of some encouragement for people to take a look at it when it comes out. So I hope everyone enjoys what we have to say. So Thomas, tell us about yourself.
Oh, well, I got my PhD in philosophy at Catholic University in 2020. I've done a couple of postdocs at Princeton, and right now I wear a bunch of different hats, lecturing and working on my research and editing a public-facing journal that's called the Vital Center. So if you check that out as well. I'm also on Twitter, so you can check out what I'm doing. But my big projects right now are an academic book that I have to revise and resubmit at Georgetown Press called Natural Law and Constitutional Democracy, where in it I draw on the tradition of natural law theory to present as an alternative to these post-liberal visions, a defense of modern constitutional democracy like that we have in the United States. I'm a big American patriot, and I'm also Catholic, so try to reconcile those two things and I think I do a pretty good job, but we'll see. People
I'm
can
sure
read
you
it.
do an excellent job. In
Yeah.
the same vein, I do work on American Catholicism and political philosophy, although Thomas is a philosopher. I'm a political scientist. So my job is more about the way ideas and institutions operate in tandem. So I had a book in 2019 called Religion in the Public Square, Sheen, King, and Falwell that came out on the University of Pennsylvania Press that talked about that very issue. Different religious figures, very different religious figures advanced political foundations in religion, specifically versions of Christianity or the Judeo-Christian tradition, as they called it, so they could incorporate the Jewish minorities in the United States, and how they were able to leverage that into advocacy for policies. So Sheen was, a sponsor of the Cold War, advocate for support for the Catholic Church. Of course, King, Martin Luther King Jr., man most people are familiar with, wanting to end segregation and advocate for greater economic opportunity and security for Black Americans. And Falwell, moral majority, sort of opposed to social change, especially in respect to family and sexual stuff. So these are the backgrounds we come from. I went to the University of Virginia. I'm older than Thomas. I got my PhD in 2012. Worked with Jim Caesar there, and I'm also Catholic, cradle Catholic. So that means that I grew up in Texas during the battle days, right? Of the discovery of the different scandals. A lot of people kind of vanished from the church after that. I stuck around.
Yeah.
And in fact, that whole background is useful for us to think about as a background for the emergence of the subject of our book, which is post-liberalism. And because I'm hosting, I get to answer the easy questions. I give Thomas the hard ones. What is post-liberalism?
Post-liberalism. Well, the post-liberalism that we are addressing, there's two types of post-liberalism. There's this theological post-liberalism that we leave alone. It goes back to the 1990s. They it's mostly Christians who just, would rather stay out of the mundane character of
A lot of them
democratic
are
politics.
Anglican, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are, and they just
Alistair
sort of have this,
Roberts and
yeah,
what's the
they don't
name of
actually promote any political vision that's radical. They just don't like the mundane quality of democratic politics, so they like to downplay
what
it.
is the one English professor who's always posting pictures of like rural England?
Oh
Milbank,
yeah,
John Milbank?
John Milbank.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Not,
think
not a
so.
lot of politics to like the Heath.
Yeah, yeah. And we're not really with them, but we're not really against them either. They just do their own thing. It has almost no impact on the real, like, I mean, sorry, and it has no impact on politics.
No, no. Well,
Um,
I think they would agree that their version of post-liberalism does not affect like conceptions of the administrative state, and I don't think they really, I don't think that's really their aim.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They don't. They have no like. Yeah, they're just not like that. They don't have this will for power or anything like that. They're just
And they got kind of their brand stolen, right?
yeah, they got their brand stolen because everyone talks about post-liberalism, they're talking about the second type of post-liberalism, which is a political project that really what you would say it really gets started with Deneen's book, right? Why
Mm-hmm.
Liberalism Failed. Yeah, I mean you could kind of see it in Rod Dreher's book, The Benedict Option,
Yeah.
a little bit, but yeah, so sort of those two books kind of fed off one another. But Patrick Deneen is the political theorist, and he wrote this book in 2000, was it 16?
17.
17, called Why Liberalism Failed. And
It was a hit.
yeah, it was a huge hit. Sold a ton of books. A lot of it was because Barack Obama endorsed it. Well, he said
Mm-hmm.
people should read it. He didn't say, I don't know what parts he agreed with, but he said people should read it. So yeah, I think and that's just a general critique. And what throws people off is a lot of like normal people they say, oh, I like Deneen. Yeah, I don't, he rips on liberalism, and they don't really know what he's talking about. They think he's talking about like liberalism, like John Rawls or something, or like something left. What we used to say growing up, calling liberals, it was like the left wing people in the Democrats, the
Right.
Democratic Party. But it's far more radical than that. He's opposed not just to like the Democratic Party, but like Ronald Reagan as well. So it's like
So no wonder
Eisenhower,
Obama endorsed it.
Washington. What's up?
So no wonder Obama endorsed it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's right. So it's like, it's far more radical than it seems at first sight. It's very much lumps people like James Madison and George Washington in with John Rawls and condemns them all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not from a history standpoint, it's not very strong. From a history of ideas standpoint, it's not very strong either because it lumps all these disparate thinkers together into this one notion, and it doesn't really work. But rhetorically, it was very effective because he pulled every tool in the belt that's been used for successful political rhetoric, and he used it all at once. And
right down to misquoting the Federalist Papers.
Yeah, right down to misquoting. Yeah, misquoting the Federalist Papers, and then when he gets called on it, just whatever. Don't need to correct it. I stand by that misquote.
What was the name of the book that was written and like based entirely around Deneen shrugging off the fact that he did that? A guy wrote a whole book about Deneen after that.
Oh, was that the one?
Oh no. What have we done? I brought up something and we both forgot. We'll look it up later. While you're continuing, I'll look it up.
Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, I could just
I sprung it on you like it's a.
You're talking about the Riley book.
Yes, Riley.
Yeah. Yes.
What's that?
That's a good book. Yeah, I liked it. I disagree with some things, but it was good. Yeah. No, it's so that's what it is. And what the interesting thing is they did that thing in 2017.
America on Trial: A Defense of the Founding.
Yes,
by
that's
Robert
right.
Riley. Oh my gosh, that was going to drive me crazy. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted.
Oh no, it's okay. But in 2017, though, he did that thing where, first of all, he said, hey, listen, it's just inevitable. He did that Marxist thing where he says, oh, listen, this whole thing's going to collapse anyways. It doesn't even matter if I critique it. It's going to collapse by its own weight. that liberalism has been a victim of its own success, and by virtue of its success, it's going to fail, and we're just going to have to build something from the ruins of it. I don't know what that thing is that we're going to build from the ruins of it is. I don't want to make any claims like that because then that might get critiqued. So like, I don't have an actual plan here, but something organic, something from the bottom up will emerge in its, you know, in its wake. And the thing is it didn't take very long. Deneen probably, what was it, like 2020? When did Deneen stop getting so non-committal about alternatives?
It was pretty soon after another major post-liberal figure reviewed the book in American Affairs, co-founded a journal by another post-liberal. The critique was written by Adrian Vermeule, and the journal was co-founded by Gladden Papin. Julius Krein is the other figure, but he doesn't really factor into this. And I forget when that review was. You can tell we really prepared for this podcast. Let's see, American Affairs. This is an important review because it is the major change in approach to post-liberalism. Oh, I said 2017. That was the original publication date for the book, but Deneen, I think, had to delay publication for the same reason a lot of people did, which is they all assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win. I think he had to change it. I was actually supposed to be on a Author Meets Critics at APSA in 2017, and he didn't show up because he didn't have a book. The name of the review is Integration from Within. It's by Adrian Vermeule. The article itself came out in spring of 2018, or the review, and in it you get this effort of Vermeule to describe the problem of Deneen being that liberalism doesn't care if you aren't going to create an ideology to oppose it, because it knows that you cannot defeat it without one. So this approach, you'll notice I'm describing liberalism as like a political actor here. I'm using like the neuter pronouns. This is a trope of post-liberals to treat liberalism as not just a concept, but as like a historical actor or a historical force. And so occasionally Deneen will talk about elites. This is more of a feature of his later book, A Regime Change. And in the Vermeule review, he talks about liberal agents sometimes. But the major thrust of the review is for Deneen to go beyond prescription of the problem and instead start to apply a political program. He says at the end of the review, here too there is no hint of retreat into localism. There is instead a determination to co-opt and transform the decaying regime from within its own core. It may thus appear providential that liberalism, despite itself, has prepared a state capable of great tasks as a legacy to bequeath to a new and doubtless very different future. The vast bureaucracy created by liberalism in pursuit of a mirage of depoliticized governments may, by the invisible hand of providence, be turned into new ends, becoming the great instrument with which to restore a substantive politics of the good. And this has a note, and that note is to Meist. And it's important that we see that note to Meist because, of course, post-liberalism relies very heavily on the European reactionary political tradition, but especially Vermeule's treatment here in a way that Deneen really doesn't cotton to very much. Deneen's post-liberalism remains still somehow grounded in a more American tradition that draws more from Tocqueville. But it's also very funny that Vermeule here talks about providence in twice, providential that liberalism, and then invisible hand of providence, and then refers to Meist because Meist was also a Freemason who had a masonry has a lot to say about providence. I'm not sure if Vermeule's doing that as a joke or if he doesn't know. Probably the latter. So this element of Vermeule's critique really is what defines the movement of post-liberalism away from awaiting some kind of new emergence of regime. That was the, as you mentioned earlier, the Dreher retreat, right? The fight or
Mhm.
flight response goes from flight and Dreher to fight with Vermeule, and the promised outcome of the fighting with Vermeule is fighting on Vermeule's behalf is um, to get the entire administrative state at your fingertips to implement an entirely new vision of the world. And what he says is the substantive politics of the good. And what is that? What is that called? It's called integralism.
Mhm.
So what's
Mhm.
integralism?
Well, yeah, I'll get to integralism in 1 second, but we should also point out too that in addition to the Vermeule thing, right, which is sort of a long-term project, right?
Yes.
In the short term, almost all of these guys rallied around Viktor Orban in Hungary
Yes.
as
The
like their
globe.
short-term model, huh?
Denis goes to Hungary and he sits next to Orban, and there's this enormous globe. You
Oh
know,
yeah,
do
oh
you
yeah,
remember
that's
that
right.
picture? It was sort of like when Trump went to Saudi Arabia and he put his hand on the orb.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I forgot
this
about
time it's
that.
a
Yeah,
globe.
yeah. So you see right away, like just sort of this kind of connects it back to those older reactionary moments that you mentioned in your book, like Meist and those other European reactionaries and also South American reactionaries.
Mm-hmm.
That they tend to they have their critique of the existing liberal order, and then their solution always is almost inevitably whoever the strongest bully is on the block, the person who can use that strong arm to defeat their enemies, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that when you say that's right?
Yeah, just baptize them, and then what they're doing is good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So Orban's got this reputation for being a little bit authoritarian for Western standards.
Mm-hmm.
That he sort of removed some of the checks and balances that are in place in his country, so that he can have a stronger executive. Um, and that tends to be the thing that all these post-liberal or reactionary groups tend to end up if they don't start there, that's where they end up. You know, you might
And of
start talking
course,
about.
this co-founder of American Affairs, Gladden Papin, at the time he founded it, was I think he was working at Notre Dame in a temporary capacity. He takes a job at the University of Dallas, teaching political theory there, but now has moved on and actually works in an official state capacity for the government of Hungary and the Fidesz party that um, Orban heads. So this has gone from a kind of friendly relationship between post liberals to a kind of state sponsored variety, all of which is
Yeah.
very odd because post liberalism, and as the way we understand it and are treating it, is
Mm-hmm.
Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And Orban is Protestant.
Mm-hmm.
And Hungary is one of the least observant religious countries
Mm-hmm.
in the European Union. Um, so it's odd that Hungary would be treated as a kind of vanguard for post liberalism when
Mm-hmm.
it is run by an authoritarian Protestant, has about what 5 million people in it, and almost none of whom go to mass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you see the same thing. I mean, your book goes through the whole history of this connection between the radicals. I mean, your part of your contribution to our book. I mean,
Yeah,
your contribution because you tend towards the more historical stuff. It You show in there. I've seen drafts that you show this connection all the way back between the sort of papalist integralism side that we're going to talk about here, and the sort of just reactionary side of anti-liberal side of it. And the reactionary anti-liberal side almost always sides with these sort of authoritarian thugs, right?
yeah.
Even if
The
they're not religious.
That's right. The reason, in fact, at one point you actually have the Pope opposing um, Catholic liberals in France wanting to protect Poland,
Yeah,
even though the Polish were seeking a revolution against the Tsar,
yeah,
who's Orthodox. And the reason is because the Austrian Habsburgs did not want an independent Poland. So for the papacy of the period, it was actually better for them to satisfy the political ambitions of the Austrian Habsburgs
Mm-hmm.
than the Catholics in Poland seeking to have a Catholic state. And
Mm-hmm.
you would think that this would run crosswise with post-liberalism, but that's actually fine, because for someone like Vermeulen, who understands that this is all providential, sort of short-term selling out of people is fine, because it'll all cash out in the end.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. And then so so that's where we're, and we also, sorry, we also should mention it's not just Orban, right? It's other, even today with the post-liberals today, Orban's not their only buddy, right? There are other
Yeah.
authoritarians that they tend to favor, who are something like, we've
So
seen common.
Orban is sort of like the cat's paw. He's sort of like the one that you start with,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're initiated into the next rank, and you start
Mm-hmm.
talking about how Russia is a great defender of Christendom,
Yes.
has the impossible task, yet succeeded at doing so as a defender of Christendom, to have a actual lower attendance rate of religious institutions than Hungary. And no doubt that if you were to do the cross stabs on religious attendance, what you would observe is that if you took out the Muslims, the
Mm-hmm.
rate of religious attendance would like go to near zero,
Yeah.
because the Muslims in Dagestan are the ones that are actually keeping the numbers above 20%, or
Mm-hmm.
around there. And then, of course, the final boss, the sort of, or the final initiation, the highest rank, is that you start talking about China, and this is
Mm-hmm.
Vermeulen's a favored regime much more than um, the way that Deneen and especially Papin have spoken about Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
And really for Vermeulen, we're one G baptism away from the kingdom of God on earth, which is only a
Yeah.
slight a slight understatement. But he
Yeah.
really likes China.
Yeah. I mean, and we should say that, to give all of these people the benefit of the doubt, um, recently they all have shown signs of distancing themselves from this stuff. But this is things that they said that have still been influential on their movement over the last few years. So, I mean, what I think Sorab also, who also has distanced himself from all this, now he's becoming more of a social democrat. But when he was at the peak of his post-liberalism, he was talking about how he feels pretty good about a 21st century dominated by the CCP.
Yeah, and this distancing that you're observing actually is well timed with our own project, which is that
Mhm.
we originally proposed the title "Why Post-Liberalism Failed" as a bit of a pun on Deneen's book "Why Liberalism Failed." We did this as kind of
Mhm.
to be a little tongue in cheek, and then it actually failed.
Yeah.
uh, the original post-liberalism that failed in the book was actually all of the people we've seen try to do this before. We've seen
Hmm.
it happen in the 30s. We saw it happen in the 19th century, and then theirs failed. So in a
Hmm.
way, this book went from anticipating the death of post-liberalism to an autopsy.
Hmm.
Um, and this distancing from authoritarian China, I'm not sure if Vermeulen's done that himself, but the
Hmm.
general sort of post-liberal movement towards recommending it as a counterexample has faded.
Hmm.
Although Hungary and I think Russia are probably a little bit more heavily favored. Although the Russian example might be really more the result not of post-liberals in the United States and other Anglo American sort of world. Some of these people come from England too, like Thomas Pink, although but we can talk about them later.
Hmm.
Um, and more, it might just be straight up Russian propaganda that has nothing to
Yeah.
do with them.
Yeah. You see that sometimes just with like sort of the mega right too, and Tucker Carlson and all that. So that there's that element too.
Although
That's sort
Tucker's been to
of,
both, right? He went to Russia and he's been to Hungary. So
yeah,
there's a
that's right.
kind of world there we're not really privy to and won't speculate about like all the influence regimes going on, because we're
Yeah.
just a couple of nerds. We're
Yeah.
not investigative journalists. Getting intelligence caches distributed to us through
Yeah.
microfiche.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at poker, so there's no Casino Royale for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. We should probably stay on topic. Although I think you and I have both seen things that are concerning.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the other side of this that we haven't talked about yet is the integralism side,
Right.
which is a matter of Catholic. It's a question of Catholic doctrine and Catholic theology. So integralism also started getting really big in like the last 14 years.
Yeah, it started with, Father Edmund Waldstein's blog. I think it's called Santa Crucis. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And then eventually started the Josias. And I'm not sure when you first started to circulate in their work, but I was actually kind of an early taker. Partly because I came to Ave Maria in 2016, and I worked as a colleague with his parents, and so I knew his parents as theologians, and found the Josias by talking to them. Also, there was a graduate student, now faculty member here, named Dr. Daniel Lenman, who was like personal friends with Dr. Waldstein, or Father Waldstein. So I sort of knew about it early, and it was 2016 that I first heard about it and started to follow it. I'm not sure when did you?
Well, I was a seminarian, a Catholic seminarian from about 2008 to 2012, and I had a good experience in that. And there's a lot of good things from that, and I met some very good people. But I was already then concerned about a certain growth and in these ideas of integralism. But first when I was first in seminary, it was normally an issue of people being sympathetic to Archbishop Lefebvre. He
Right.
was the sort of I can't say schismatic because they're unusual situation that the Lefebvres have in relation to the Catholic Church. And their big thing was they just criticized the Second Vatican Council. They criticized Dignitatis Humanae for being a big break from previous doctrine. And that was less the people who were trying to be faithful to the Pope and the Magisterium. It was less popular with them, right? Because they didn't want to say like the Second Vatican Council was just wrong. But then this around, what was it, 2010 or 2012, the Thomas Pink came along, and he gave a different interpretation of Dignitatis Humanae that reconciled it in his mind with both affirming the council and Catholic integralism still being the sort of promoted officially by the Catholic Church. And for those who are listening and don't know what Catholic integralism is, it's a lot of things. But like fundamentally, like a core doctrine has to do with this idea that the Pope has an indirect temporal authority so that they can direct the state, a Catholic state, a state that's constitutionally Catholic, to punish violations of canon law or something, or, things like heresy and apostasy, things that are normally outside the scope of the temporal authority. But that doesn't really define integralism, and absolutely, that's not really when people call themselves an integralist, they're normally saying a little bit more than that. Because you could have somebody like Jacques Maritain who says like, yeah, the indirect authority is there. It's hypothetically, you could use it in a just way, right?
Right. And
Hypothetically,
Maritain, for those not listening, is a great Catholic political philosopher of the 20th century, and a major, actually started as something of an integralist back in the early 20th century as a member of Action Française under Charles Marat. And after the party was condemned in 1926, has this about face, and gets himself actually into a lot of fights with his former comrades. Like,
that's right.
Father
And
Julio
over time, he became less and less radical until he wasn't radical at all.
And he's why we have the UN now, right? Isn't it his fault?
Well, I've heard some people downplay it, but I know he was involved in like the putting together, or at least defending, the Charter on Human Rights in 1940 1945. But
Usually
he,
the people who talk about that are saying this as a bad thing.
yeah, well, I think it's, yeah, we think it's a good thing. Yeah. But what he said, but he's not going to say that it's always wrong for there to be a Catholic state where the Pope, has this authority, although he'll probably challenge some of the huge abuses of that historically. But he's just going to say it's not ideal. It's not necessarily ideal. It might have been ideal in a very specific situation, but it's not like transhistorically ideal. In that something like Dignitatis Humanae might be getting at a better, a better approach, a better political philosophy in the
So
real world most of the
so,
time. Right?
so Dignitatis Humanae establishes religious liberty as bound up in the dignity of the human person.
That's right.
And the human person's dignity is fixed. It's a fixed
Mm-hmm.
aspect. It's not changeable. And so what seems weird is that the reading that Pink gives to Dignitatis Humanae is, and in future episodes we'll get much more in depth with this stuff, is that it actually is not fixed, or at least the church's treatment of it isn't fixed, that this is a policy change, not a dogmatic or a doctrinal change. It raises two questions. First is, was Catholic integralism like dogma or doctrine? What's the difference between those two? And the other question is, does the church normally do this, where it makes a policy change while calling it something much more than a policy change? Is it like to lie and it's conciliar declarations?
Yeah, and it's a very complex matter, but he was Pink was responding to Martin Ronheimer, who at the time was defending and still defending Pope Benedict XVI interpretation of Dignitatis Humanae, that it was where he applies a hermeneutic of reform, where he says it was a change. It wasn't a change to any perennial doctrine of the church that was irreformable, but it was a change to the social doctrine of the church at the level of reformable doctrine about the state, about what would be and Pink, when he responds to Ronheimer, just completely misunderstands what Ronheimer is getting at. In fact, and Pink, he thinks that Ronheimer is saying that, before the council, the church taught that it was okay for the state, by its own authority in a natural law, like the natural law state, by its own authority, to punish heretics and apostates and promote the true religion. And that's not what the pre-Second Vatican Council church was teaching at all, Pink says, right? But Ronheimer wasn't saying that at all. And it's actually a really complex question, because Pink goes on this long critique of Ronheimer, in which he's, what's that term when you're arguing against something that isn't there? What's that?
Straw man?
Yeah, he's going against a straw man. There's like another, there's another Latin phrase for it, whatever. But he's going against something that isn't Ronheimer's.
Know my Latin? It's been years. Et conspiritu tuo, is that what it's called?
Yeah. Because there's three things going on here, right?
Yeah.
Does the Pope have some sort of indirect temporal authority? That's complex. Yeah, probably, but what do you mean by that, right? Is that can that sometimes in some contexts be applied, at least sort of, can it be justifiable to apply it that way, in a context of having some sort of public orthodoxy or something like that, like in the Christendom in the 1300s, when they thought that you needed some sort of, that there was a common interest there, that the temporal authority needed to secure some sort of commonality of ecclesiastical commonality, so that they could have peace, so that they could have justice and peace, or whatever. So from their medieval mindset, what the possibilities that were available to them, could this be justified morally? I'm inclined to think you could at some level, though I oppose all the burning of heretics and all that, the hardcore stuff. But I could see from their mentality in Christendom how it could be politically prudent. to have the arrangement that they did. But there's on the second level thing though is when you have the natural law in its principles, like you have, for instance, you have first principles like these goods and like the ends of the virtues of justice and all of that, and then you have like sort of these second level norms, like the norm against murder and the norm against stealing and the norm against whatever, and then you go like further out, and then you get to the point where you're just dealing with what's called prudence, right? And it's not, it's all that comes from the natural law is to be reasonable, right? But below that is just prudence. And then with the political sphere, you have political prudence, right? So from the standpoint of natural law, which the church claims to have authority in its interpretation of, to applying that to political matters, this mediating in this realm of political prudence is political philosophy, right? Some sort of philosophy of the state, some sort of doctrine of the state. Now, there are some things that there are some philosophies of the state that are incompatible with some higher principle of natural law, or they're incompatible with some revealed doctrine. It seems to me that plausible that to say that the spiritual authority is in some sense higher than the temporal authority is plausibly comes from revelation, right? That the authority of God is higher than that of Caesar. We believe that. That comes from revelation. You could probably figure that out from natural reason as well. There's a few other things that probably come from revelation, and there's the things that come from revelation might include also our doctrine about baptism and the duties that come from baptism, and it could be about the authority of the Pope over the baptized, and the authority of the church to defend itself, the authority of church, the importance of the freedom of the church to do its own mission. These things are plausibly part of revelation. And over on the natural law side, you could say there are a bunch of things that our doctrine of the state must be consistent with, right? Our doctrine of the state can't be allowing sort of immoralities that from the standpoint of natural law, or they can't be promoting them, and they can, all these things, right? So there are constraints that both revelation and natural law have on your doctrine of the state, right?
Right.
But the doctrine of the
oh, go ahead.
The doctrine of the state itself is very little of it's going to come from revelation, and very little of it's going to be deduced from natural law. So there's a lot of stuff that's coming outside of those two sources where the church has its main authority, right? The church has to, though, approve of some doctrine of the state that can effectively implement and be consistent with these other higher principles, right?
Yeah, the example of when you look in the scriptures, especially the gospel, and the relationship to politics, you get you get the healing of the ear. Christ heals the ear of the guy who attacks, or Peter attacks. It's the sort of servant of the temple, and you get the legendary line, living by the sword, dying by the sword. Is based on that, or is that from scripture? Have I blanked?
No, that's right there. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
there.
That's right. Okay.
After the Garden of Gethsemane.
And you have the conversations with Pilate, and what's funny about the temporal power there is that it seems kind of indifferent to questions of truth.
Yeah.
So the church has to bring that to government. But notice it's not done by force; it's done by ministry. You have the discussion with what's the other one that I always like to, of course, of Caesar's coin, in which Christ makes no statement about what the things that are belong to Caesar's. And there's one more, and I had it and lost it, but these sort of scriptural references are fleeting. They're not like lengthy juridical statements like you get with the Quran or with the Hebrew scriptures that are meant to be sort of binding on the Jewish people about dietary restrictions. And so the result is that much of this is done by the application of human reason, duly informed by revelation.
That's right.
So how does it? So this cashes out in post-liberalism a very specific way, where post-liberals imagine themselves as revolutionary figures who will not man the barricades, but rather operate from within. This is the integration from within, because the regime of liberalism is falling apart and leaves open the possibility for that infiltration. And then upon working their way into the administrative state, will fundamentally change it by deposing the old liberal order slowly but surely and reimposing a new one, which is the integralist order, in which the administrative state works hand in glove with the church to impose regulations that will make people more likely to become members of the Catholic Church,
Mm-hmm.
participate in its sacraments. And all of this sounds um, it sounds kind of like harebrained, right? It's like how that
Mm-hmm.
this could happen, but at least like the end sounds nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until you understand that, and doing this entails things like, as you were describing, the sort of different spheres of what social doctrine is. This means turning human dignity into a question of prudence, not
Yeah,
into
yeah.
an issue of natural law.
Mm-hmm.
And where we've seen regimes treat dignity as a matter of prudence,
Yeah,
um, we've seen a lot of people that post liberals like do all sorts of terrible things to people who are religious minorities.
yeah. And I do think though, I do think we also have to separate too Thomas Pink from these guys, these post liberals, because Thomas Pink is just, he's a professor and he's trying to make sense of all these documents of the church. And he he says himself that he's critical of the way it's been applied throughout the centuries. He's critical of some of the extremes. He thinks that the uh, the regulations to use to um, uh, make people wear certain clothing because of their religion in the past was wrong, and that they shouldn't have never done that. He's actually only favors very subtle. Um, uh, if we were ever to reach a point where he got his ideal arrangement, he would only favor subtle application of the temporal authority to
You
these
mean the
things.
moment when Pope Francis will say, "Dignitatis Humanae is over. The policy has
Yeah,
changed. It was that
the policy
easy. We
has
can
changed.
just
That's right.
that's right. We can just pull the curtain,
Yeah,
and now suddenly it's but integralism's back. You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. He's like, guys,
it's
we went along with this for a few hundred years, but now, or a few decades because we had to. But now that we're back in charge, we can do it our way.
yeah. In the
Yeah,
middle of
no,
his papacy, he just pivots. He's Pius the 13th now.
yeah, yeah.
He's going all in. So this
It,
this is the sort of broad brush strokes we have of post liberalism. The project that we have is one that goes through the problems of both the dependence on a peculiar reading of church history and reactionary political thought, as well as the misapplication of Catholic integralism, especially with respect to integralism being taught as a kind of unreformable dogma of the church.
mm-hmm,
Um, and we have really done a disservice to a person in whose footsteps we're walking, which is the great Dr. Kevin Valier. He's written an outstanding book on this called All the Kingdoms of the World, which is a direct refutation of integralism by using analytical political philosophy, a political philosophy that I do not have any training in. And I was trained as a Straussian, which is immediately going to make people freak out, that, neocon is talking. But so I read Kevin's book, and like everything in me wants to fight back. But it's
mm-hmm.
really a fabulously argued book on the question of integralism, and we kind of wanted to
Especially
write this.
that fourth and fifth chapter when he just gets into the problems of implementation and the stability issue. That's where he really shines, I think.
Those
I
two
think he goes too
chapters are
easy on
worth
them
the
from a
price.
doctrinal standpoint.
Yeah, those two chapters are worth the price alone, but really everything about it's good. The
Mm-hmm,
book that we're writing will have some issues with some of the history he does, as well as his treatment of
mm-hmm.
Pink. And so we kind
Yeah.
of see ourselves as writing a sequel based off of different perspectives. You're a natural law political philosopher, and
Mm-hmm,
I'm an institutionalist.
mm-hmm.
And so one of the problems we regularly run into with post liberals is that they only think of like first order questions where institutions will have outcomes in mind, and all you have to do is apply the institutions and you'll get those outcomes and nothing else. These are
Yeah.
problems that are replete This idea of integrating from within assumes that once they're integrated from within, the people within the regime will have no incentives aside to do what Adrian wants them to do.
Yeah,
That's not
yeah,
how these things
exactly.
work.
Like they won't revolt or something. Yeah,
Yeah, we had Catholic bureaucracies before, and then afterwards they stopped being Catholic. I wonder what happened.
yeah, yeah,
But these are
exactly.
all questions for future episodes.
Yeah,
Uh,
I just wanted to clarify. I think Kevin's book was great, all of it, not just those two chapters. But he's a very charitable person, and I think sometimes he's a little too charitable when it comes to some stuff.
yeah, and
That's
he's one of the people who taught us to do this.
mhm.
So maybe as we continue to produce episodes like these, we'll have him come on talk about this sort of stuff, because in a way, like one of the chapters, the next chapter I'm going to write most likely does a lot of applying of what
Mhm.
Kevin argues. His discussion of the problems that implementing integralism has on an analytical frame definitely bear out in the historical frame, even when you go to like the imagined past of King
Mhm.
Saint Louis the Ninth. Turns out actually was maybe personally a pious man, but was actually rather bad king,
Yeah,
especially if you were a
okay.
French Jew.
Yeah, no, yeah,
uh,
definitely. Yeah, I agree. And um, one thing I want to point out though for the listeners is that this thing about Thomas Paine, we were talking about Thomas Paine and his interpretation of Dignitatis Humanae. Well, in our book we critique his interpretation of Dignitatis Humanae and say he kind of misses the point on what Ronheimer and Benedict XVI were trying to get at. Um, but here's the thing: he shouldn't be very useful to these people, the post-liberals, because if you don't have the Pope's blessing, you can't do any of this stuff, and you can't even move towards it. You should just embrace like something like the American regime until the Pope says otherwise.
which is what all popes since the Second Vatican Council have more or less said. It's
Yeah,
been a long time since Longique Oceani,
yeah,
when Leo the 13th said, "Why don't you guys have a Catholic confession there yet?" After
yeah,
20 years
yeah,
of like rampant anti-Catholicism, Leo the 13th's like, checking his watch. He's like, "TikTok, guys, let's get to Meanwhile, dioceses are declaring bankruptcy.
yeah.
So yeah, that's actually quite right. This is what ultimately is one of the sort of faltering points here when it comes to the restoration of Catholic integralism within the church,
Mhm,
rather than from kind of margins in the Lefebvrist Society of Saint Pius X.
mhm,
Because there, out on the margins, you can be considerably more denunciatory towards the papacy. Whereas if you're going to affirm that you are a person who's a Catholic that is in obedience to the spiritual authority of the Pope, and the Pope, like Pope Francis, says integralism is poison, it's a
mhm.
plague. They're like, well, the Pope, he either A, doesn't mean it, which is a funny thing to say about an Argentine who actually lived in it, where there was a real life integralist party that was part of a right wing populist dictatorship.
Mhm.
Or he's wrong, in which case you're back out to Lefebvre.
Yeah,
Um, so
yeah, right.
it's one thing to be an ultramontanist and say that the Pope should have these kinds of authorities. It's just he shouldn't have these authorities over integralism. And the reason that they
Mhm,
take this position is the idea of integralism as unreformable dogma, um, which means that they have to be Lefebvrists.
mhm.
Since every pope since the Second Vatican Council has affirmed a non-integralist social doctrine.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And it seems yeah, so we'll get into that more. There's a few different issues, but my biggest concern is like, to kind of point out again for the listeners, most of these big name professors who were called themselves post liberals are kind of distancing themselves from the movement. And I think as part of it, I think is because they've seen some of the radical elements and they're trying to get away from it. Um, our bigger concern though is you even if those high profile people are going away, it still has a big impact on the younger people, like just younger people, like the young students, the seminarians, all of that. Wouldn't you say that's right?
Yeah, so I'm at a Catholic Newman school,
Mm-hmm,
and there's considerable openness to ideas of Catholic integralism, normally because what they're told this means is like Sabbath laws, So you have like Sunday closures, like bars and
Yeah.
liquor stores can't be open. And
Hmm.
you ask them, it's like, well, what about this impacting like non-Catholics? And they'll be like, no, they should just go to mass too. And it's like, like it's not quite how it works. The history of Sabbath laws has largely been shaking down Jewish business owners and imposing costs on them so they can't compete with non-Jewish business owners, especially where they were migrants from Central Europe in the early 20th century. And
Yeah.
that's again the situation where what they're thinking of, and this is a very undergraduate way of thinking, right? They're thinking about what's the intention, and so will the outcome be what I intended? And the answer
Hmm.
is maybe, but there are all these secondary unintended consequences that require consideration. But because it's sold as like things can be better, which is a good thing to tell students that you can make things better,
Hmm.
normally what they hear is like, well, then liberalism's bad because it gave us drag queen story hour. It gave us the what is it the that European dance music prize, the Eurovision. It
Hmm.
gave us you know all of these woke movies and television programs, and so they're against that. So they're in favor of integralism, and so this is the sort
Hmm.
of like the introductory level of integralism is opposition to immoral excesses. And you find that these very good motives in many cases kind of get transformed into an opposition to free government itself,
Hmm.
and an indifference to the way that where there's real public disagreement, there needs to be an observation of rights and dignity of individuals in those governments, and that if there's going to be a disagreement, then there needs to be constitutional order to ensure that it's a peaceful disagreement.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and a lot of them too are just confused about what integralism is. And like you're saying, I mean, blue laws, we've had our criticisms of them, but they were part of the United States for 200 years. I mean, they weren't integralist per se. Um, and if you, a lot of them associate it with a confessional state, and it's like, okay, well, I don't support a confessional state in the U.S., but I mean, if you have them in England, you have them in Europe. They aren't necessarily all that radical, but it would probably be radical to try to shift the United States to one now. But it really has nothing to do with integralism, just to have a confessional state, especially if it's a toothless confessional state. Um, some of them are confused, that they said that the ones I've talked to online who are supposedly pretty smarter ones, um, they thought that the United Kingdom was a integralist regime or something. It's like, or whatever, or that the state of Israel was integralist, just Jewish integralist. And it's like, I don't even know
Yeah.
if that makes sense. I mean, the
It
integralism
can't,
itself.
it can't be integralism if it's Catholic, because that depends on the indirect authority of the
Yeah.
Pope. And so to call, I have seen, I know which one you're talking about with the idea of Israel as
Yeah.
a Jewish integralist state. And it's like,
Hmm.
buddy, I don't think the Israeli government's interested in what the papal authority has to say about the the use
Yeah.
the use of its spiritual authority. I don't, and certainly I think there are very strong reasons why the British Crown is not interested in the indirect temporal authority of Rome. A big one being that authority was invoked for the deposition of Elizabeth I and a
Yeah.
papal bull condemning her to hell
Hmm.
and inspiring the Guy Fawkes gunpowder plot. So the British are not keen on this sort of stuff. We've had like I'm Prince Harry's wife, the Canadian girl, I
Hmm.
forget her name, girl, I think she's like in her like 40s, the actress, but she was Catholic and she had to convert
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
it's still an issue there.
So I guess
People,
that's the most, not in, if you use the term analogously to like Anglican integralism, that's like the most
right,
integralist aspect, is that they're not allowed to have Catholics in charge, right?
right.
Yeah. Or
But
like
in
in
this case,
Israel,
the
some of their
spiritual authority of the
immigration.
papacy is now retained by the crown, so they get to do
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. And whereas
Um,
in Israel, they're not punishing heretics and apostates, maybe some of their immigration policy has a little bit of elements of whatever,
yeah,
but
it's a
it's
Jewish
very
state. Uh,
marginal. Yeah.
but the way you can institutionalize Judaism in Israel is not the way that you institutionalize Catholicism and a Catholic state. And a
Hmm.
lot of this has to do with the nature of Judaism, as well as the multiplicity of Jewish traditions. People
Hmm.
usually, when they think of a Jewish state, they'll think of like Ashkenazi or sort of European portions of the diaspora, but they forget all about the Mizrahi,
Hmm.
the North African, Arab, and even like the Ethiopian Jews. There's a lot of different sort of cultures, and so what's amazing is that Israel's approach to religion is kind of like they give exemptions to the Hasidim so they don't have to participate in the wars, but
Hmm.
everything else is kind of like, I mean, they have gay marriage there. It's not
Yeah.
exactly the kind of integralism that
Yeah.
you get from your average first reader of Aquinas
Yeah.
in
It's not
college.
far removed from what European states do with bloodlines, like how they say, it's easier to become an Italian citizen if you have Italian blood.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm not
So
saying
this
that
is a
it's
this is
not
a
integralism.
natural place to stop because we've kind of clarified the subject matter, or at least created a kind of syllabus for what we're going
Hmm.
to describe, and we've teased a few things from reactionary political thought of Europeans to the papalism of the medieval and early modern church to the ultramontanism of the 19th century church, the controversy over Ronheimer and Pink,
Hmm.
which there's an outstanding video that was done as part of an event a few years ago for the De Nicola Center at Notre Dame, in which Pink and Ronheimer have a debate.
Hmm.
Being a major nerd about this sort of stuff, I would listen to it semi regularly. At the end, Michael Brendan Doherty is there, and he asks a question. I'm like, oh my gosh, right? It's everyone was there. I wasn't there, but everyone was there. So hopefully this got everyone excited about the project, or at least interested. We'll be releasing more of these, talking a bit more about what we're writing on. I'm writing about the history stuff, which is why I talked a little bit more about it. Which one are you doing right now, Thomas? Is the Pink chapter?
Yeah, I'm finishing up I've got like, I don't know, 5,300 words in the pink. We're aiming for 5 to 6,000. I got about 5,300 words on the pink chapter. And going back to it, I'm like seeing all this stuff that I didn't even notice before. It's just been really enlightening. Um, I like Thomas Pink. I think he seems like a nice guy or whatever. He seems like a very good scholar and all of that. But I really think he misunderstood what Ronheimer and Benedict XVI were getting at, and I think that it's fundamental for understanding where he goes, where he goes wrong. But I don't know if many people have addressed him head on, and I'm hoping that our chapter will be able to do that better, and hopefully convince him maybe.
Yeah, I've got
Hopefully,
a beefy 10,000 word chapter. It might be split in half, or might have to be seriously cut down. Of course, we're going to exchange chapters eventually to start
integrating.
adding and subtracting stuff, but we're starting with our strengths. So this is the kind of stuff that I've done a lot of work on but never published on. So it's going to be in this book, and of course,
Well, that first chapter that your is your primary chapter. Boy, that's really interesting stuff about the history of the conspiracies about Freemasonry and
I
oh
love that stuff,
man,
man. It's crazy. That's right.
oh man.
Come for the come for the post liberal critique, and stay for the history of anti-Semitic Judeo-Masonic conspiracy
Ooh.
theories. The best one of that is the story of a guy named Leo Taxel, but we'll have to get to that in a
You
future
should teach a
episode.
class on that, James. It should be a required
Yeah.
class at Ave Maria.
Okay? Well, we'll end on this. My students know this. So when I came to Ave Maria, I got some questions about the origin of the American Constitution, because there are some very prominent American Catholics that are very anti-American.
Mhm.
And they refer to the Constitution as a Masonic dish rag. I think that's also a line from Archbishop Vigano, who's a very like prominent critic of Pope Francis. And
Mhm.
so I found this position very weird, because I mean there were Freemasons in the among the founders, but they were not the majority.
Mhm.
And even the ones who were, they weren't exactly like, I don't know, like Demised, right? Or like
Yeah.
or like and any of the real weirdos that were into
Mhm.
this sort of stuff. They were just regular guys that, you know, talked about Boaz, and the other column name for the, I don't know. So you know, I have, they know that I have like a 30-minute explanation of what to actually be worried and upset about with masonry, and all the weird stuff that you can just let go of. All right. Like
Yeah.
it's uh there were a lot of bad Freemasons in Italy. All right. They were not very nice to the Pope. All right. But did they collaborate for international conspiracy with the Jews to undermine the throne and altar? No, they did not. Uh, that is a
Good.
goofy thing to think. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's actually going to be at the heart of a lot of what we're going to discuss going.
Mhm.
So much Thomas Pink, who is a lovely gentleman and a scholar. We just disagree with him, but some unfortunate people in the past that did a lot to lay the groundwork for post-liberalism. Uh,
Mhm.
they they were um, they were a bit strange about this sort of thing. A defender of Americanism, another sort of controversy that will come up, named Abbe Felix Klein, actually described the people who hated him and what he was defending as having Jews on the brain, and something he could not understand, and only
Yeah.
later would see as the result of this kind of heated conspiracy theory that had merged, especially after the French Revolution.
Wow.
Any final words, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I don't come across as uncharitable, but I just really think that this post-liberalism thing is a big problem. It corrupts the youth, and I'm excited to that we're working on this book that's going to absolutely demolish it. And hopefully it'll be required reading in all freshman courses, in or all freshman year at all Catholic universities, I
That's
think.
right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. And
right.
even
We
the
need
not Catholic ones, they should know about it too.
it's going to be studied at Louvain. It's going to get framed in the hallways of the Vatican. I look forward to the personal invitation written by Pope Francis. We're kind
No,
of a big deal
absolutely.
around here.
And for
Eh,
every book we sell, we have to sell more books than Deneen, and then we'll know that he defeated it.
We're going to get President Trump to endorse ours.
Oh no.
Well, I think the person who would probably endorse it would actually be George W. Bush. So let's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
let's not seek a presidential endorsement.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
this is a great
Maybe
book.
we get Jeb to endorse it.
No, we do not want Jeb's endorsement. You know what, Jeb? I'll take your endorsement. All right.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Inside the flap, though.
Yeah.
All right, Thomas. It was good talking to you. We'll do the next one. We haven't settled on what that subject will be, but it will probably be more of the historical origin stuff. But
Yeah.
if you want something different because of what you heard us say during
No.
this sort of thing, just let us know. This is a very unstructured conversational podcast with very little of an agenda aside from just talking about issues that are interesting to us and we know have been interesting to other people. So I hope this was enlightening. I apologize for the messiness of my bookcase behind me. That is all the result of having to write a book. Real ones know, if you've been an author, what this is like.
Mhm.
So I will talk us out here, Thomas. Thank you so much. We'll see all of you later.
Thank you.